todas. Bonjour, good morning to this, good afternoon, to this last session of this seminar, Maquettes, Models, in which the Católica University and the LOCI Architecture Faculty of la Université Catholique de Louvain trabajamos juntos en un proyecto de pensamiento alrededor de las maquetas y la arquitectura. Aujourd'hui, on va commencer avec la présentation de Renaud Pleitinx et après, on aura la présentation de Maya Bayen. Et avec ça, je veux prévenir, ça va finir la communication publique sur Facebook et YouTube du séminaire. Ce qu'on voit dans le programme de la deuxième partie va rester un séminaire plus concentré de participants. Et donc, Renaud, bienvenue.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. So, écran partagé. Do you see me, or do you see the projection?
No.
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 Strange. So wait, partager. Ah, yes. Ready? Steady? Well, the purpose of this contribution is to give an overview of the place of the notion of model in the theory, in architectural theory. For this overview, I systematically gathered and scanned 34 books belonging to the corpus of architectural theory, seeking for any mention of model. What I'm going to present to you are the results of this first analysis, hoping it will raise questions and issues to be tackled in the further sessions of this seminar. My speech will be divided in two parts. In the first, I will focus on pure linguistic matters, the different words I found in our corpus that are used to refer to a model, la maquette, and the different contexts for their use. In the second part, I will draw your attention on two interesting theoretical issues, which I call the model-model relationship and the drawing model struggle. So I shall begin with linguistic matters. The corpus I chose includes theoretical works that expand from the Kaogong-ji 500 BC to the last book of van der Laan, published in 1989. This corpus contains some of the key works of European and in particular French architectural theory. For first overview, it provides a significant sample of the whole architectural theory. In this corpus, I found 6 different words to refer to models. 2 of them belong to Latin, 1 of them to Italian, and the last 3 to French. In Latin, you have exemplar, used by Vitruvius in his De Architectura, and you have modulus, used by Alberti in his De Re Aedificatoria. In Italian, you find the word modello. In French, finally, you can find the word modèle with 2 L's, which is a particular to Philibert Delorme, the word modèle, which is the most common, and the word maquette, which appears 1 time in the conclusion of Gromot's essay sur la théorie de l'architecture. For the sake of completeness, I shall point that the word maquette also appears on the cover of the French edition of L'Espace Architectonique of Hans van der Laan. It mentions, I quote, sur la couverture, maquette de Stonehenge, end of quote. So we can say now that Hans van der Laan never actually wrote a word about any kind of model. These words are used in 3 kinds of contexts. first is when the author talks about one model in particular. For instance, when Vitruvius evokes the never-working Callias war engine in the last chapter of the De Architectura. The second kind of context is when the author mentions the model in the course of his speech as a design tool that must be used by architects. The third kind of context is when the author takes the time to explain what a model is, what a good model is, how to make a model, and how to use it. There are only 3 cases of that last kind in our corpus. In his De Re Edificatoria, Alberti recommends the use of the model and asks to make it plain and simple, nudos et simplices. In his Premier tome de l'Architecture, Philibert Delorme recommends to make several models of the same building. In his Cours d'Architecture, Jacques-François Blondel advises to make models, especially in the case of great buildings. In conclusion of this first linguistic part, I want to make 2 observations. The first observation is that the French word maquette, which derives from the Italian one macchietta, which means small spot, did not appear in architectural theory until the 20th century. Before, the word model was the sole to be used in French, as it still is in Spanish and English. The second observation is that the topic of model seems to have lost its relevance. While many authors belonging to the Renaissance mention it as a useful design tool, for the end of the 17th century until now, except for Jacques-François Blondel, no one talks about model, no one. Here comes already the second part of my speech, which will focus on 2 theoretical issues related to the model. The first issue I want to discuss is what I ironically refer to as model-model relationship. Why model-model? Well, first, it is striking to observe that the words usually used to designate a model, meaning a design tool, are also usually used to designate a model, meaning something to be copied or imitated. It is true for the Latin word exemplar, for the Italian one modello, for the French one modèle, and we know that it is the same with model in English and or with modello in Spanish. It is not surprising that a word has 2 meanings. It is quite usual. But in this case, the same word refers to things that are on each side of a relationship that defines both of them. On one hand, a model as a design tool is by definition related to something else that can be called its model. On the other hand, a model as something to be copied or imitated is by definition linked to something else that may be a model as a design tool. There is here more than an ambiguity. It is a logical circle that can be an obstacle to the comprehension of the models and consequently an obstacle to their study. Therefore, the usual notion of model requires theoretical clarification. As I told you before, many authors belonging to our corpus give examples of models, which are very different from one another. In order to emphasize these differences and to put a bit of order in their variety, I'm going to propose some clarification of the notion of model, which means that I will complicate both the words and the things. As a matter of fact, the model-model relationship hides 2 kinds of relations, which are the repetition and the variation. On one hand, the repetition links a prototype to a stereotype, let's say an original to a copy. In this case, the principle is to add an object to another, both identical. It is a question of quantity. The one becomes 2. On the other hand, the variation links an archetype to a neotype. Let's say a paradigm to an inflection or a version. In this case, the principle is to modify something into a similar thing. It is here a question of quality. The same becomes different. If you distinguish and combine these two relationships, you can define a logical square in which 4 positions are available. At one corner, the holotype corresponds to the model, copy, or to imitate. At the 2 closest corners to the first, the isotype or isotype is the result of a repetition, while the idiotype is the result of a variation. At the opposite corner to the first is the paratype, which results of the combination of a variation and a repetition. This logical square can be useful to understand the model and, moreover, to study the different cases of model. I'm going to try to convince you that a model, as a design tool, can be either a paratype, a holotype, and in some limit cases, close to an isotype. I will illustrate my demonstration with examples given by the authors belonging to our corpus. The basic case is the following. The model is the paratype of an existing building. It is a separate object similar to a building. This is illustrated by the curious double movable theater models that Delorme confirms to have built at the demand of Misser Vincent Rotland. The classical architectural case is quite the same as the basic one, except for the fact that the building does not exist. You can find several illustrations of this case in the theoretical literature. In our corpus, you have the model that, according to Serlio, Bramante makes of his project for the Basilica of St. Peter. A third case, more subtle, but quite usual in fact, is the one where the model becomes the holotype of an inexistent paratypic building. In this case, the model inspires a becoming building. It can be illustrated by Serlio himself, who says that wise architects could use in their own works the composition visible in Bramante vestiges, which include the already built basement of the Basilica and his remaining models. To sum up, in this last case, the model becomes the model. But there are also limit cases. The first limit case is the one where the variation between the building as a holotype and the model as a paratype go too far. In this case, the relationship of similarity between the holotype and its paratype is definitely broken. It can be illustrated by Callias' model mentioned by Vitruvius, which represents a war machine that perfectly worked in a small scale, but never in life size because of physical limits. A second limit case is the one where the variation between the holotype and its paratype is so little that the model becomes the building itself. This case finds a perfect illustration in the model of the triumphal arch designed by Perrault, which was, according to Jacques-François Blondel, built of plaster and close to the plot where the real one should have been built. Finally, a third very limited case is the Dwarf Building, as Jacques-François Blondel says. It is when a building seems to be, I quote, the model of another building, end of quote. In this case, the building is the paratype of another holotypic one. An example for this case is given by Lougier. It is the sanctuary of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois Church, a very funny example that you can see on the picture. The second issue I want to briefly discuss is the model drawing struggle. Several authors like Alberti, Aladio, Filaret, Delorme, Jacques-François Blondel emphasize and insist on the complementarity of the drawings and the models in the design process. These authors treat them both without any order of prevalence. But this approach is quite a minority in our corpus. Earlier, I noticed that over time, the topic of model seems to have lost its relevance. This could be explained by the increasing importance given to drawing. As a matter of fact, the majority of the authors reserve a better place for the drawing. Let me give you a few examples. Vitruvius speaks of model, but not until the last chapter of his last book, while he mentions drawing in the second chapter of his very first book, precisely where he defines the word architecture, confer ichnographia, orthographia, scenographia. Serlio mentions the use of the maquette only twice in 7 books, but devotes the totality of il secondo libro to perspective drawing, to what Vitruvius refers to as scenographia. Boulet never mentions the model, but Boulet, whose useful dream was to become a painter, constantly talks about drawings. And even he defends the idea that the purpose of architecture is to produce moving canvas. Durand does not mention the model, even though it could replace advantageously the geometrical drawing, which he surprisingly criticized at the beginning of his course, saying that geometrical drawing is false, and I quote, ridiculous when one wants to represent the effect of a building, end of quote. Gadet, Julien Gadet, too, does not talk about model. However, he dedicates to drawing the first book of the first volume of his Éléments et théorie. The term maquette does not appear anywhere in Vers une architecture, but Le Corbusier devotes 2 chapters to the question of the plan, first in Trois rappels à messieurs les architectes, 3 le plan, then in Architecture 2, l'illusion des plans. Finally, in his essay sur l'architecture, sur la théorie de l'architecture, excuse my French, Gromor only mentions once the use of the maquette, and in a very specific context. In the conclusion of his work, Gromor challenges the primacy given to the plan by the members of the Académie des Beaux-Arts and promotes the simultaneous use of sections, plans, and elevations. He added that one should, I quote, strive to see in perspective, in space, and to conceive a building by representing it as a model, as a maquette, end of quote. Strange conclusion indeed. With Gromor, the model is not a design tool anymore, like the drawing is. The model is the model, let's say, the holotype of the mental representation one should have of the building. In the theory of architecture, drawing is thus the preferred representation technique. And why? Is it the high cost of making a model that tips the economy balance in favor of drawing? Is it the progress of technical drawing that makes it possible to consider the model as redundant or superfluous representation technique? This remains to be clarified. In conclusion, I would like to recall that this contribution had for purpose to give an overview of the place of models in architectural theory. In the future sessions of our seminar, it would be appropriate to continue the work started here. From a linguistic point of view, the corpus studied could first be deepened and extended to other linguistic areas. We could also try to explain the reasons for the relatively recent replacement of the French word modèle by maquette. On a theoretical level, we could deepen our understanding of the model in order to continue to visit its different cases. Finally, we could try to explain the victory of the drawing over the model and reflect on a possible contemporary turnaround. Thank you for your attention.
Merci, Renaud. Thank you, Renaud. I open the session to the contributions, questions, or comments of the participants here on YouTube or Facebook. No, I have a little question. I'm sorry, Gita, please.
Yeah.
Well, of course, you can go.
There is a lot of noise around here, so it's very...
Okay. So, français, anglais, which do you prefer?
As you want. I will ask you to translate after that. Yeah. Say
Okay.
Say it in English.
I shall say it in English, and then we can maybe speak it in French.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna reflect on my own just recent experience, where yesterday I was part of the jury of first-year student final examinations, and where I got to see that the model, or la maquette, was a big part of the project, but it was, in most cases, it was not used as a study model. It was more like the result of a project that was conceived on paper, on plans, with on paper, with drawing. And what I want to ask is, where do you think in the process of architecture, of making architecture, does the intellectual part of making a maquette, or visualizing in 3D and making a 3D object, where does it fall in the process of, or where should it maybe fall in the process of making an architecture?
Well, tout le monde a compris? Well, I think that I will try to answer in French, in English. I think there is no rules. We discussed yesterday about the fact that it was Louis that asked us today that asked us if what we should do with a photogrammetric model. I thought that we don't need it. In fact, architects don't need absolutely a model, and don't need a photogrammetric model neither, because we have the drawing. And normally, if you can draw, you don't need a model. If you can draw, you see, like Renaud said, you see in 3D in your mind. A good drawer, a good reader of plans and sections and elevations doesn't need a model. So I think you can use, if you want, architects can, if they want, use a model at any time. There is no preferred time, I think. It's just supplementary tool. That's my opinion. So I don't think the model is required.
And there is no rule to where it should be included.
I don't think so. I don't think so. No.
Because what was funny yesterday is that we saw some students that made their projects on SketchUp, and then drew over the project, which was funny because I think that they're not usually allowed in the first year to use SketchUp or any other or any other software. But it was funny to see that they did the other way around. They did the
but that's only pedagogical bias, I think.
Right.
normally you can, if you want, you can use a model at the beginning of your work if you want, but I don't think it's necessary.
Mm-hmm. So it's fully representative. C'est la représentation.
It could be very useful in the process of the design. In the design process, it could be very useful. And I think there are many architects that use often the model, and maybe only the model. That I have no problem with that. So everything is possible, I think. And you don't need, and with the new digital tools, you don't need, you don't need drawings if you want. You can not use drawing. You can just modeling, and after that, putting that on 2D. Mm-hmm. But it's not like there is a moment where the model is necessary, mandatory. It is mandatory at school, but in the real life, I think the architects are free to choose.
Thank you.
Welcome. Ravi d'avoir parlé en anglais.
Merci.
Vraiment. Quel détour, quelle étrange détour.
Mais oui. Voilà, donc je laisse la parole à Apollo.
Yeah. Just a remark, an observation, maybe. It's, do you think there is a certain relationship between the space models and drawings are in the books of architecture and a certain end of the idea of the treatise or the manual as a form of communication of ideas for architects?
Ça, j'ai pas vu. I don't know. Maybe well. Could be an hypothesis.
I mean, treatises and manuals have a strong part of the core of those kind of texts. Obviously, very theoretical, even philosophical, historical, but it's a lot. It's necessary to focus also in processes, processes of construction, processes of design. So the discussion of the plan or the discussion of the model is more likely to appear. But I think that is going to be more in the 20th century, where why do we talk about models, or even why do we talk about drawings? No, it's clear, as you mentioned, that Le Corbusier was the more radical to insist in that the plan is basically all you need. Basically, yes. In a very particular relationship of the exceptionality of the capacity of an architect to imagine, no, which is no, just was a comment about text, treatises, and manuals, and the kind of text that can mention or not mention the idea of models, maquettes, or plans or drawings. No?
Si je peux faire une petite remarque.
Yes, please.
Non, c'est parce qu'on parlait de SketchUp et j'ai été amené ici ces dernières semaines à investiguer un peu les pratiques des étudiants, en tout cas à Louvain-la-Neuve, et je pense que ça se passe à beaucoup d'endroits. C'est que justement, ils utilisent SketchUp, comme disait Gita, avant la maquette, pour concevoir la maquette. Donc, pas pour concevoir l'architecture de leur projet, mais pour concevoir la maquette. Et donc, toutes les articulations, les avancées de carton et tout ça. Et donc, il y a quelque chose d'étrange quand même à fabriquer des maquettes qui sont une architecture en soi, mais qui ne sont pas l'architecture de leur projet. ou alors avec peu de moyens, parce que du coup, tout ce qui est articulation, tout ce qui est, je dirais, implémentation des contacts entre les différents pans de l'architecture qu'ils produisent, sont extrêmement simplifiés, puisqu'en fait, les machines simplifient extrêmement à l'extrême les contacts entre les parties. Et donc, ça aboutit à des architectures un peu étranges quand même, qui ne sont pas de l'ordre je ne sais pas comment dire, de l'émergence du projet, mais qui sont de l'ordre de la maquette particulièrement la maquette de présentation, et pas la maquette de travail. Donc, pas la maquette où, un peu comme avec le dessin, où on triture la chose pour voir quel comportement on peut lui trouver, quelles règles on peut lui trouver, quelles proportions, je ne sais pas. Ils sont extrêmement préoccupés par l'exactitude nécessaire, puisque numérique, du fichier qu'ils vont fournir. Et donc, il y a quand même, moi je trouve, même si je suis d'accord, il n'y a pas de préséance d'un médium sur l'autre, mais par contre, il y a l'importance de ce que le médium produit sur notre manière de penser le projet et de le voir d'une certaine manière abstraitement. Et donc, il y a une espèce de déviation, comme ça, je trouve, en tout cas, des pratiques. Et qu'il faut y prêter garde, en fait. Je trouve que c'est un phénomène à discuter avec eux. Ici, moi, je leur posais des questions. Je ne suis pas au fait, jusqu'à présent, je n'étais pas au fait des différentes techniques, fraisage, laser, tout ça. Maintenant, j'ai un peu investigué tout ça. Et on ne peut pas dire que ça produit un grand pas en avant de la conscience de ce que l'on produit en tant qu'architecture. Mais voilà, c'était pour dire qu'il y a quand même des travers à surveiller si on veut qu'ils redeviennent droits.
Oui, mais on parle d'étudiants qui n'ont pas une maîtrise extraordinaire de l'outil.
Ça, c'est possible.
Et donc l'outil produit un effet de filtre terrible. Et donc, je pense que quand tu connais tes outils, quand tu sais dessiner, quand tu sais comment faire une maquette, ce qui n'est pas évident, alors enfin l'outil devient transparent et tu ne vois plus dans l'outil que le holotype et pas le paratype que tu as sous les yeux. Or, je pense que tout l'enjeu de l'apprentissage du dessin et des techniques de représentation, c'est d'arriver à un stade de parfaite transparence de l'outil. Sans quoi l'outil devient effectivement générateur de l'architecture, ce qui peut éventuellement être conçu comme un bénéfice. Mais je pense que je pense toujours que le dessin d'architecture, the drawing, the architectural drawing is like writing. If you're a good writer, you or a good reader, you just hear the voice of people who are writing you. Mm. So you hear the voice, and we architects see the space when looking at the plans and the drawings or the maquette or the model. Donc il y a l'idée à un moment, c'est un peu comme le marteau. Comme les marteaux qui sont les gens qui utilisent souvent un marteau savent, ne sentent plus la main qui tient le marteau. Ils touchent du bout du marteau. Le marteau est transparent.
Je peux intervenir un tout petit peu? Oui.
Of course.
Non, juste comme ça, c'est parce que je trouve que c'est intéressant. Mais je pense que ça pose la question du rapport entre la 2D et la 3D aussi. Si tu veux, donc, si je suis tout à fait d'accord que l'architecture s'exprime avec le dessin et que c'est l'outil d'écriture, je veux dire, de l'architecture, il y a la communication aussi qui est différente. Et je pense que la maquette est souvent demandée à l'architecte pour pour présenter son projet, quelque
Oui.
part, pour le vendre
Oui, oui.
à des gens qui n'ont pas la
Oui,
maîtrise de cet outil 2D. Et d'ailleurs, Jean l'a bien montré hier à la Renaissance avec les maquettes même de façade de la cathédrale qui étaient présentées. À la limite, je veux dire qu'il y a une sorte de suspicion des non-architectes par rapport à la maîtrise du dessin d'architecture. Et la maquette donne une sorte de, comment ça, de confiance dans la réalité de ce que ça pourrait être en vrai, puisque c'est déjà de la 3D. Tu vois. Donc,
Tout à fait, oui.
la maîtrise du dessin en perspective, même, je veux dire, elle est teintée d'une sorte d'artifice, je veux dire, de maîtrise, comme la peinture. Elle est de l'ordre du décor, quelque part. Tandis qu'une maquette, tout à coup, présentée à un client, et on le voyait bien, je trouve, dans les peintures qu'a présenté Jean hier, il y a, voilà, c'est comme ça, on voit, voilà ce que je vais faire, exactement. Tu vois, enfin, voilà.
C'est
Il y a
vrai.
ce rapport-là aussi, je pense.
Oui. Et c'est encore pire avec la réalité virtuelle. C'est-à-dire que la grande différence entre la réalité virtuelle et l'image, c'est que la réalité virtuelle est déceptive, elle te déçoit. Quand tu visites ça, c'est pire que d'aller sur un chantier. Tu vois ton bâtiment et tu dis, oh mon Dieu, oh non, qu'est-ce que j'ai fait? Mais qu'est-ce que j'ai fait? Et donc, il y a un effet, je trouve, dans la réalité virtuelle où tu n'y as absolument pas la séduction de l'image. Tu es face à la chose et parfois de manière terrible parce que la chose est mauvaise. Et donc ça, je trouve ça hyper intéressant. Effectivement, la 3D te met un peu plus face aux choses. Et pour ça, je pense que la 3D ou la réalité virtuelle peut être utile pour les clients, vraiment pour les amener à participer au projet. Mais normalement, un architecte rompu, en pleine maîtrise de ses moyens, devrait pouvoir jongler avec ses outils. Et donc peut-être se passer des uns ou des autres. Voilà. I think we've reached the end of my time.
Oh, more or less.
Je peux encore dire une petite chose.
Mais oui.
Pour emboîter sur ce que Quentin expliquait et à partir du relevé fait par Renaud, des occurrences, etc. Si on prend la Renaissance, on produit effectivement beaucoup de maquettes, on l'a vu, mais ça continue dans les siècles suivants. Donc, il y a un fait maquette qui est là. Le mot maquette, ou modèle, équivalent, ne sont pas présents dans les textes, dans les traités, mais elles sont là.
Ouais.
Mais je soupçonne fort, comme on l'a vu, Michel-Ange qui montre sa proposition au Saint-Pierre au pape, comme toutes les autres maquettes qu'on a vues, qui sont des maquettes en bois, parce qu'ils sont toujours là, très léchées, qui sont le fait d'artisans, de menuisiers, d'ébénistes. Elles sont faites effectivement pour séduire. La façade de la cathédrale, la basilique de Florence, mais il y a un concours, donc il y a un enjeu. Et je soupçonne fort qu'effectivement, le recours à la maquette, dans ces siècles-là, ce n'était pas du tout à des fins de production de la conception architecturale qui passait ailleurs. Et effectivement, ce que raconte Vitruve, l'iconographie, la sérigraphie, la coupe, l'élévation, je pense que c'était des outils dominants. Quand on voit justement sur Saint-Pierre, par exemple, les moments cruciaux dans la discussion, ce sont des plans. Quoi. Il y a le plan de Raphaël, il y a le plan de Michel-Ange, de Bramante, et c'est vraiment là que ça se passe. Mais à un moment, il faut effectivement essayer de convaincre la curie, le pape, etc. Et on produit des maquettes, qui sont les maquettes que l'on cherche qui doivent faire effet, sans se séduire, emporter la séduction. Et donc, du coup, on peut imaginer effectivement qu'il y a un discord entre le travail que l'on fait très concrètement, la théorie que l'on développe à propos de ce travail, et puis les maquettes, c'est autre chose. En fait, c'est une scène sociale qui est relativement étrangère au travail d'atelier. Alberti lui-même, il dit la maquette, mais si vous faites des maquettes très simples, hein, pas de couleurs, il ne faut pas séduire, etc. Et la perspective aussi, il envoie un petit peu promener pour l'architecture. Pour lui, c'est vraiment les projections orthogonales.
Et il y a,
Si, moi,
il y a une je réfléchissais à ce que j'allais vous présenter. Je me disais que j'avais peut-être laissé passer un cas de la maquette qui est présent dans la théorie, je pense, et même chez Alberti. Alberti, par exemple, parle de la mise au point des toitures. Il dit la maquette, elle est surtout utile pour la mise au point des toitures. Parce que, comme il dit, la toiture, c'est ce que l'homme a inventé de plus extraordinaire. Ce n'est pas les murs, genre, c'est la toiture. Donc, il dit la toiture, et pourquoi? Parce c'est elle qui guide l'eau jusqu'aux égouts, jusqu'à la rivière. Et donc, c'est les toitures. Et donc, c'est pour mettre au point les toitures que la maquette est utile à ses yeux. Et donc, il y a quand même chez lui l'idée que la maquette est un lieu de vérification ou de contrôle du bon fonctionnement de l'architecture. Et peut-être éventuellement, mais ça, je n'ai pas trouvé comme tel, la possibilité de prendre la maquette et de commencer à la bouger. Et donc, de faire de la maquette un idiotype d'elle-même. Et donc, on aurait alors la possibilité de mettre la maquette dans les quatre coins du carré. Donc, je pense que la maquette que l'on fait évoluer, c'est la maquette qui est un idiotype d'elle-même. Il y a le holotype, et puis elle varie, et donc la maquette varie elle-même, et donc on n'a pas besoin de produire un autre objet, c'est l'objet qui se transforme, ce qui est tout à fait singulier. Mais cette position-là, je ne l'ai pas montrée, et je pense qu'elle existe, mais je ne l'ai pas trouvée telle qu'elle dans la littérature. Et donc, il faudrait chercher peut-être encore pour la trouver, celle-là, l'endroit où un architecte dit ce qui est chouette avec une maquette, c'est qu'on peut la triturer, ce que disait tout à l'heure Frédéric, qu'on peut la modifier, on peut la faire varier, et donc elle devient effectivement le lieu d'une invention potentielle.
no, it's just a reaction. That's not something that I've thought. Is that even plants are finally communications tools.
Yeah.
Communication tools, and they're basically instructions for other specialists.
Absolutely.
So the difference is let's say, the typology of the other. Is the public or is the specialist, is the technician, but they are basically communication tools. No, they are not structurally conceptual tools. In any case, maybe there are structurally conception tools. As I think we know, we take drawings as conceptual tools because of our tradition, and maybe it's a discussion if there is something structural in the idea of drawing or in the idea of 2D, in the way we think, or in the way we are able to think 3D or space. But I think the discussion, plan, maquette, there is not necessarily structurally strong, because there are both communicational tools. You know? I'm not quite sure if in the space of the conception of the thing, which comes first, I don't know, because even we talk about a plan or a section. We say that the plan is an horizontal section, but it's an horizontal section of what? No. So our ability is to create something which is 3D somewhere, which we cut horizontally, diagonally, or vertically. But there is something else which is cut, at least in the words we use to. Maybe there's not the case, but in the words you use to say the plan, we say it's a cut. It's a cut of what? So it's supposed a 3D previous conception. So the relation with that, I think that it's a caricatura, but let's say Gary wrap a paper, and that's the beginning of a building. And I'm not I'm not sure if it's possible to say that that's not a possible way of beginning a building, or the as you say, the miniature or the imitation of architecture itself. When we work with the Awahun community to learn traditional construction system and architecture, and they came to the faculty to build something, they didn't use nor drawings nor maquettes. It's a repetition of the process of making a space. No?
Absolutely.
And in that case, obviously, not obviously, but the model was a communication tool much more efficient than the drawing. The drawing didn't work for the conversation with the community. The model did, but in the sense that you can make in miniature everything, no, even the knots or the clue, no, in the sense that it's construction, not abstract, not in the sense of a paper model, but in the sense that it's a miniature of everything, not only of the totality, but also of the construction detail, no.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point it out that is that condition. No,
yeah.
Of the,
I agree with you. You're right.
Maybe it's because Maya and me we came from a tradition of models, but not in a radical sense. But yes, in the introduction of the model inside our processes, no, or the. Yes. But not because how much? Because I also think that the digital models poses different questions than the physical models. The idea that the students start with a 3D and then make the plan and then make the physical model is a switch in the process of what we are talking about. So, so I think the plan and the physical model and the digital model are now it's something is changing. Or a possibility is changing.
Paolo, juste une remarque par rapport à ce que tu viens de dire. Je me disais justement que curieusement, ne sont contractuels que les dessins 2D. Une maquette 3D jusqu'à présent, alors ça peut changer, mais n'est pas contractuel. Donc pour discuter, pour communiquer un projet contractuellement avec une entreprise ou des bureaux d'études, ce sont les dessins 2D qui, du coup, doivent être complets, couper les choses dans tous les sens pour y arriver, avec une extrême attention de l'architecte, pour ne rien oublier, sinon il se met en défaut. Et peut-être, par rapport à ce que tu dis, que justement, la modification serait que si, on en a parlé hier, tout le monde a à sa disposition les mêmes moyens, et ce qui n'est pas évident, hein, les mêmes moyens techniques de mise en œuvre du modèle numérique, donc le BIM, pour ne pas le nommer, c'est peut-être lui le seul qui serait capable de remplacer le dessin 2D, le groupe complet des dessins 3D, 2D dans un dossier pour être contractuel. Donc là, il y a quand même... Parce qu'il faut que tout le monde, du coup, soit au même niveau de formation. Je ne parle pas de la communication à la communauté, comme tu disais, mais je parle de la communication avec les intervenants de l'édifice. Là, il y a quelque chose quand même qui est potentiellement, ce n'est pas encore gagné, parce qu'on n'a même pas fini de rendre le fichier AutoCAD, on va dire, contractuel. Je veux dire, même lui, en fait, le papier reste contractuel. Et même dans les cahiers de charges, le papier est déclaré prioritaire sur les descriptifs. Donc, ça veut quand même dire quelque chose sur l'inertie de la communication du projet entre les différents intervenants. Y compris, alors après, on peut effectivement élargir à la communauté béotienne, on va dire, comme on dit dans les termes juridiques.
Thank you, Frédéric. Thank you, Renaud. Now we
Thank you all.
invite Maya Bayen to share